Every time you announce your next big goal to the world, you're actively destroying your ability to achieve it. When you tell someone your plan, your brain releases a surge of dopamine, tricking your nervous system into feeling as if the work is already done. You are trading your actual future for cheap, immediate applause. If you want to build a life of genuine power, you must learn to endure the heavy, uncomfortable weight of absolute silence. You wake up with intention, not vague intention. Clear intention. You've thought about it the night before. You told yourself, this time will be different. You're going to train consistently. You're going to build something meaningful. You're going to finally take control of your time. And before you've done a single hour of real work, you reach for your phone. Not out of weakness, out of habit. You type something simple. Day 1, new chapter. Locked in. You hit post. And within seconds, something shifts inside your body. A small release. A quiet sense of progress. People respond. Likes appear. Comments come in. Encouragement. Recognition. And without realizing it, your brain registers something dangerous. It feels like you've already begun. It feels like you've already moved forward. But nothing has actually changed. Let me show you how subtle this becomes. A man decides he's going to wake up at 5 a.m. every day. He's serious this time. He announces it publicly. His friends support him. The first 2 mornings, he follows through. By day 5, he's negotiating with the alarm. By day 10, the routine is gone. But the post is still there. The identity is still there. The feeling of being someone disciplined is still there. And that illusion is enough to keep him comfortable. Or maybe this feels closer. You sit down to work, laptop open, task clearly defined. You tell yourself, just focus for 1 hour. 5 minutes in, you check your phone, just to clear something, just to reset your mind. You scroll, a video, then another, then a comment thread. You glance at the clock. 45 minutes are gone. You feel tired, not from effort, but from fragmentation. And yet, somehow, your day feels full. Your mind feels busy. Your body feels drained. But when you step back and look at it honestly, what did you actually build? This is the modern struggle. Not laziness. Not lack of ambition. It's something more deceptive. You are constantly simulating progress without ever fully entering it. You are performing effort instead of executing it. And the most dangerous part is this. You don't feel like you're stuck. You feel like you're trying. Think about your last 6 months. How many goals have you shared? How many plans have you explained? How many times have you described a version of yourself you're becoming? Now ask yourself something more uncomfortable. How much of that became real? There is a specific kind of exhaustion that comes from this pattern. It's not physical fatigue. It's not even mental overload in the traditional sense. It's the exhaustion of carrying an identity that hasn't been earned. You are holding on to a version of yourself that exists mostly in conversation, not in reality, and maintaining that gap drains you. Most people think they're overwhelmed because they're doing too much. But look closer. You're not overwhelmed by action. You're overwhelmed by intention without closure. Too many open loops. Too many declared missions. Too many unfinished identities. Every goal you announce becomes a psychological contract. And when you don't fulfill it, your brain doesn't just forget. It keeps it open. Quietly. Constantly. Let me ask you something. Are you actually building your life, or are you constantly reporting on a life you haven't built yet? This is where it becomes dangerous, because the world you live in today rewards visibility, not completion. It rewards expression, not execution. You can look productive. You can sound ambitious. You can even convince yourself that you're evolving, while staying in the exact same place, year after year, and eventually something shifts. not in your schedule, not in your goals. In your belief, you start to quietly lose trust in yourself. Not because you don't care, but because you've told yourself too many stories that never became real. This is the point most people never diagnose. They think they need more discipline, more motivation, a better system. But the real issue isn't what you're doing. It's what you're rewarding. And once you see this clearly, you start to realize the problem isn't that you're not capable. The problem is that you've been training your brain to feel satisfied before the work even begins. And that is where everything starts to collapse. What you're experiencing is not random. It's not a personality flaw. It's not a lack of willpower. It's a miswired reward system. And once you understand this, the entire pattern begins to make sense. Your brain is not designed to care about your long-term goals. It's designed to pursue reward. Immediate reward. This system is ancient, efficient, and brutally indifferent to your ambitions. At the center of it is a chemical you've heard about countless times, but probably underestimated. Dopamine. Most people think dopamine is about pleasure. It's not. It's about anticipation. It's the signal your brain uses to say, this matters, move toward it. It drives focus. It fuels effort. It sustains pursuit. But here's the part almost no one fully understands. Dopamine doesn't just respond to real achievement. It responds to signals of achievement. And in your current environment, those signals are everywhere. When you announce a goal, something subtle happens. You're not just communicating information. You're triggering a neurological event. Your brain interprets that declaration as progress. You've defined a target. You've expressed intent. You've received acknowledgement. And in that moment, dopamine rises. Now think carefully about what that means. Your brain has just released a chemical associated with moving toward success without you having done anything difficult. No resistance. No friction. No sacrifice. Just words. Let me ask you something. If your brain already feels rewarded, what reason does it have to push you into discomfort? This is the illusion of accomplishment. You've created the emotional signature of progress without the biological cost of earning it, and your nervous system cannot clearly distinguish the difference. This is where your execution begins to collapse, because real progress requires something your brain naturally resists: delayed reward, effort without immediate validation, repetition without applause, silence without recognition. But you've already given yourself a shortcut, a faster path to the same chemical. So your brain adapts, it learns, and this is where neuroplasticity comes in. Neuroplasticity is your brain's ability to rewire itself based on repeated behavior. Whatever you consistently do, your brain optimizes for. If you repeatedly think about goals, talk about goals, share goals, your brain starts associating those actions with reward. Not the work, not the execution, the expression. And over time, something dangerous happens. You become more skilled at talking about change and actually creating change. This is not abstract. This is measurable. There's a concept called executive energy. Think of it as your brain's capacity to focus, make decisions, override impulses, sustain effort. It is limited. And every time you simulate progress, instead of doing the work, you are spending that energy. You feel like you've done something. But in reality, you've only depleted the system needed to actually do it. Now layer this with modern life. Constant notifications. Endless content. Immediate feedback loops. Your brain is being trained daily to expect reward without effort. Quick stimulation. Fast validation. Zero friction. So when you sit down to do something meaningful, something slow, something cognitively demanding, your brain resists. Not because you're lazy, because compared to everything else it feels unrewarding. This is cognitive overload. Too many inputs. Too many micro rewards. Too many unfinished loops. Your attention is fragmented before you even begin. And then you make it worse. You introduce social validation into the system. Now, it's not just dopamine from stimulation. It's dopamine tied to identity, to how others see you, to how you see yourself. So when you say, I'm starting a business, I'm getting in shape, I'm going all in this year, you're not just setting a goal. You're constructing an identity and immediately receiving reinforcement for it. Let me ask you something. Are you addicted to progress or to the feeling of being seen as someone who is progressing? Because those are not the same. And your brain knows the difference even if you don't consciously feel it. Here's the deeper problem. When you receive validation, early you reduce the psychological tension required for action. And tension is necessary. It's what pushes you into movement. It's what keeps you uncomfortable enough to continue. But you've neutralized it. You've replaced pressure with applause. And without pressure, most people stall. This is why you can feel motivated in the moment, inspired even, and still do nothing meaningful hours later. Because the chemical spike already happened. The loop already closed. Most people respond to this by trying to force themselves. More discipline, more intensity, more self-criticism. But that doesn't solve the root issue, because you're still operating inside a broken reward structure. You don't need more motivation. You need to stop rewarding the wrong behavior. Think about that. If every time you spoke about your goals you lost a small percentage of your ability to execute them, would you still do it so casually? Because that's exactly what's happening. Quietly, consistently. This is why elite performers are extremely careful with what they reveal. Not because they're secretive, because they understand something most people don't. Attention is energy. Dopamine is currency, and where you spend it determines who you become. Right now, most people are spending it on expression, on visibility, on being understood. But the people who actually change their lives, they spend it differently. They protect it. They delay it. They earn it. And until you correct this imbalance, you will continue to feel like you're moving forward while staying exactly where you are. This is not a motivation problem. It's a neurochemical leak. And unless you close it, no system, no plan, no burst of inspiration will save you. Because the moment you speak too early, you've already started losing. And most people never even realize it. If you study people who consistently produce at a high level across decades, not weeks, you start to notice a pattern that feels almost uncomfortable in today's world. They are quiet, not because they lack ambition, not because they don't have vision, but because they understand the cost of exposure. Take someone like Kobe Bryant. People remember the championships, the highlights, the mythology. What they don't see is the structure behind it. Kobe didn't broadcast his training sessions. He didn't post day one. He didn't narrate his evolution in real time. He disappeared into it. Early mornings, empty gyms, repetition that bordered on obsession, hours where nothing looked impressive. Nothing was shareable. Nothing would earn applause. Just friction. And that friction is the point. Because elite performers are not addicted to recognition. They are conditioned to tolerate and even seek discomfort without witnesses. Think about that carefully. Most people need external acknowledgement to continue. Elite individuals remove that requirement entirely. They build systems where progress exists whether anyone sees it or not. This is what creates separation. Not talent, not opportunity, but the ability to operate without feedback. Another example. Steve Jobs was famously secretive about product development, not just from the public, but internally. Teams were isolated. Information was restricted. Products were revealed only when they were complete. Why? Control. Not just strategic control, but cognitive control. When you don't expose unfinished work to the world, you protect it from noise, from opinions, from premature judgment, from diluted focus, because the moment you share something incomplete, you invite interference. And most people are not strong enough to hold their vision steady under that pressure. Let me ask you something. How many of your ideas lost momentum not because they were bad, but because they were exposed too early? Someone questioned it. Someone didn't understand it. Someone gave you a lukewarm reaction, and suddenly your internal certainty weakened. Not completely, just enough to slow you down. Elite performers eliminate that variable. They don't test fragile ideas in public. They let them mature in silence. There's another layer to this. Identity protection. When you constantly talk about what you're going to do, you start building an identity around intention. You become the person who is starting something, the person who is about to change, the person with big plans. And people begin to recognize you that way. They respond to you that way. They expect that version of you. But here's the problem. That identity is not anchored in results. It's anchored in narrative. So now, without realizing it, you feel pressure to maintain the image, even if the execution is weak. Elite performers avoid this trap completely. They don't build identity through conversation. They build it through repetition, through proof, through outcomes that don't require explanation. Naval Ravikant once said something simple but sharp. Play long-term games with long-term people. But there's an unspoken extension to that idea. You cannot play a long-term game if you're constantly interrupting it for short-term validation. Every time you expose your process, you shrink your time horizon. You bring the reward closer. And in doing so, you weaken your ability to sustain effort. Let's ground this in something real. Imagine two people starting the same business. One documents everything, every step, every idea, every struggle. They get engagement, support, feedback. It feels like progress. The other says nothing. No announcements, no updates, just daily execution. Slow, imperfect, invisible. 6 months later, the first person has an audience. The second person has a system. 12 months later, the first person has content. The second person has results. And this is where the gap becomes irreversible, because one built attention, the other built capability. Most people choose attention because it's faster, because it's easier, because it feels like movement. But capability requires silence. Let me ask you something. If no one could see what you were doing for the next 90 days, would you still commit to it? Because that answer reveals everything. Elite performers don't rely on visibility to stay consistent. They rely on structure, on standards, on internal metrics that no one else tracks. They don't need to feel impressive. They need to be effective. And that distinction is where most people fail. They optimize for how things look instead of what things produce. There's a reason the most dangerous individuals in any field are often the least visible during their building phase. Because while others are talking, they are accumulating skill, focus, leverage, and by the time the world notices, it's already too late to compete. This is not about being mysterious. It's about being strategic. Privacy is not isolation. It is protection. Protection of your attention. Protection of your dopamine. Protection of your unfinished identity. Because once something is real, it doesn't need to be explained. And once you understand this, you start to see silence differently. Not as absence, but as power being stored. And the people who learn to hold that silence are the ones who eventually control the outcome. Now that you've seen the pattern, now that you understand how even high performers protect their silence, we need to go deeper. Because this isn't just a mindset issue. It's a system, a loop. And once this loop is installed, it runs automatically. Most people believe they are making conscious decisions throughout the day. They're not. They are executing patterns. conditioned responses. And one of the most powerful of these patterns is what we can call the validation loop. It operates in 4 stages: trigger, craving, response, reward. Simple, predictable, dangerous. Let's slow it down. The trigger is almost always internal. A moment of discomfort, boredom, uncertainty, pressure. You sit down to do something that matters, and immediately there's resistance. That resistance is not a flaw. It's friction, and friction is required for meaningful work. But your brain doesn't interpret it that way. Your brain interprets friction as a problem to solve quickly, so it moves to the next stage. Craving. You don't crave distraction. You crave relief. Relief from effort. Relief from uncertainty. Relief from the uncomfortable gap between where you are and where you want to be. And in your current environment, there is a very fast way to get that relief. Not by doing the work, but by talking about it. This is where the loop accelerates. You open your phone. You type something. You share your intention. I'm locking in. Big things coming. Time to change everything. That's the response. And it feels small. It feels harmless. It feels like momentum. But then comes a reward. And this is where the system locks you in. Someone responds. A like, a message, a comment, even your own internal sense of clarity can act as a reward, and your brain registers it instantly. Relief achieved, tension reduced, identity reinforced. Let me ask you something. If every time you felt pressure, you could remove it in under 30 seconds, would you ever train yourself to endure it? This is a trap. You are bypassing the very discomfort that would have made you stronger. And because the reward comes so quickly, your brain starts to prefer this loop. It becomes efficient, automatic, trigger, discomfort, craving relief, response, expression, reward, validation, repeat. Over time, this loop replaces something critical: your ability to sit inside unfinished work. That ability is rare, and it's where real progress happens. But you've trained your system to escape it. Now layer this into your daily life. You wake up. Before your brain has even stabilized, you introduce stimulation, notifications, messages, content. Your baseline dopamine rises immediately. Then you attempt to work. But the task is slow, demanding, unrewarding, at least in the beginning, and your brain compares it instantly to everything else available, and it loses, so the loop activates. You don't even notice it anymore. You just feel the urge. Check something, share something, break the tension. This is why your focus feels fragile. Not because you lack discipline, but because your system has been conditioned to avoid depth. And then something even more subtle happens. Your identity starts to reorganize around this loop. You become someone who thinks often, plans constantly, expresses freely, but executes inconsistently. And because the expression is rewarded, you don't feel completely off track. You feel like you're in the process. But you're not in the process. You're in the loop. Think about how dangerous that is. You can spend years here, talking, planning, announcing, feeling engaged without ever producing anything that fundamentally changes your life. And the system will support you. Social platforms reward visibility. People reward ambition. Even your own mind rewards intention. Everything around you is aligned to keep you inside the loop, except reality. Reality only responds to output. Let that land. Your bills don't care about your plans. Your health doesn't improve because you talked about it. Your skills don't grow because you announced them. Only execution moves reality. But your brain has been trained to feel satisfied without it. This is why you feel tired at the end of the day, even when you've done nothing meaningful. Because you've been cycling through the loop, again and again and again. Micro rewards, micro relief, micro distractions, each one small. But together they fragment your entire cognitive system. This is cognitive load in its most deceptive form. Not overload from work, but overload from interruption. Too many triggers, too many responses, too many rewards for things that don't matter. And eventually your capacity for deep work collapses. Not suddenly, gradually, quietly, until one day you sit down to do something important and you can't hold your attention for more than a few minutes. And you think something is wrong with you. There isn't. You've just trained your brain to expect reward before effort. And reversing that requires something most people avoid completely. You have to break the loop. Not by adding more motivation, not by forcing yourself harder, but by removing the reward from the wrong behavior. No validation for expression. No dopamine for announcing. Only reward for execution. That is the shift. And it sounds simple, but it's not easy, because when you remove the reward, you feel the full weight of the work, the silence, the doubt, the slow, invisible nature of real progress. And this is where most people quit, not because they can't do it, but because for the first time it actually feels real. No applause, no identity boost, no quick relief, just you and the work. And if you can stay there long enough, everything changes. But almost no one does, which is exactly why those who do separate. Now we move from awareness to control. Because understanding the problem without changing your behavior is just another form of passive consumption. And that's not what you're here for. If the core issue is that your brain is rewarding expression instead of execution, then the solution is not complicated, but it is uncomfortable. You have to remove yourself from the validation loop long enough for your system to reset. This is what I call the 90-day ghost protocol. 90 days of deliberate invisibility. No announcements. No progress updates. No just sharing the journey. Nothing. And for most people, this is where resistance spikes immediately, because silence feels like loss. Let me be clear. It's not loss. It's withdrawal. You are withdrawing from a system that has been overstimulating your brain and weakening your execution. So let's break this down properly. Not as an idea. As a system you can actually implement. The first move is absolute. You stop talking about what you're about to do, not selectively, not only with certain people, completely. No casual mentions, no hints, no subtle signaling. Because your brain doesn't care about intention. It responds to behavior. And every time you express the goal, you trigger the same loop. So you cut it off at the source. Now here's what happens next. And this is important. Without expression, you lose the artificial sense of progress, which means something uncomfortable returns. Tension. That tension is what you've been avoiding. And it's exactly what you need. Because tension creates movement. When your brain no longer gets rewarded for talking, it has only one option left. Work. But don't expect this to feel good. At least not in the beginning. You will sit down to do something meaningful, and it will feel slow, heavy, uncertain. That's not failure. That's recalibration. Your dopamine system is adjusting. Your brain is relearning what effort feels like without shortcuts. And this leads to the second principle. You shift your identity, not publicly, internally. You are no longer someone who talks about change. You are someone who executes quietly. That distinction matters more than you think, because identity drives behavior. If you still see yourself as someone who needs to explain what they're doing, you will find ways to leak information. But if you redefine yourself as someone who protects their process, silence becomes natural. Let me ask you something. Who are you when no one is watching? That's the identity you're building here. Now we introduce structure, because silence without structure turns into drift. You need a private system of accountability, not external, internal. This can be as simple as a notebook, a daily log, a checklist that no one else sees. You track what you said you would do, what you actually did, where you avoided discomfort. No performance, no storytelling, just truth, because the goal is not to feel productive. It's to become accurate, and accuracy builds trust. Trust in yourself. Now comes the part most people misunderstand. You are not trying to feel motivated. You are training your ability to act without needing to feel good first. This is what I call friction training. You deliberately expose yourself to work that feels slightly uncomfortable and you stay with it. No escape, no quick dopamine, no checking your phone mid-task. At first, your brain will resist aggressively. You'll feel restless, distracted, almost irritated. Good. That's the signal that the system is changing. Because for the first time, you're not giving it what it expects. And if you stay consistent, something shifts. The work becomes less threatening. Your focus stabilizes. Your tolerance for effort increases. Not dramatically, gradually. This is neuroplasticity in action. Your brain is rewiring to associate reward with completion, not expression. Now, here's another critical rule. You do not measure progress by visibility. You measure it by consistency, depth of focus, completion rate, because results lag. Always. And if you depend on visible results too early, you will break the protocol. So you commit to the process even when it feels like nothing is happening. This is where most people fail. They need proof too quickly. But real change is quiet. At first, it looks like nothing. Then it looks like small shifts. Then suddenly it compounds. And this leads to the final principle. Delayed exposure. You do not share anything until it is real, not started, not planned, completed. Because when you reveal results, you're not leaking energy. You're demonstrating it. There is no internal conflict, no gap between identity and reality, just proof. And that kind of signal is fundamentally different. Let me show you the contrast. Talking about going to the gym gives you a temporary identity. Showing up consistently for 90 days changes your body. One is perception. The other is transformation. Now understand this clearly. This protocol is not about isolation. It's about alignment. You are aligning your reward system with your actual behavior. And once that alignment is stable, discipline becomes less forced because your brain finally learns work leads reward, not words. Let me ask you something. What would your life look like if for the next 90 days you stopped explaining and only executed? No one interrupting your process. No premature validation. No identity inflation. Just you building something real. That version of you exists, but it requires something most people avoid completely. Silence. And if you can hold that silence long enough, you won't just feel different. You will become different. And at that point, you won't need to tell anyone, because the results will do it for you. Before we go any further, I need you to stop for a second. Not pause the video. Pause your pattern. Because right now, you're in a familiar position. You're listening. You're understanding. You're agreeing. And that's exactly where most people stay. They collect insight without changing behavior. They feel a temporary sense of clarity and mistake it for progress. Let me ask you something directly. Are you going to use this, or are you just going to recognize yourself in it and move on? Because those are two completely different paths. One leads to discomfort. The other leads back to the same loop you've been living in. You don't need more information. You already know enough to change. What you're missing is a decision. A decision to stop leaking your energy. A decision to tolerate silence. A decision to act without being seen. And that decision doesn't happen later. It happens now. So be honest, not with me, with yourself. Are you ready to give up the attention in order to build something real? Or do you still need to be seen before you're ready to become? Think about that, because what comes next only works if you've already chosen. Otherwise, this just becomes another video you understood and never used. TUC script, section 7, deep reflection segment. Now slow down. Don't rush past this part, because this is where everything you've heard becomes personal. Strip away the ideas for a moment. Strip away the framework. Strip away the language. Look at your own life directly. How many times have you felt the surge of clarity only to watch it fade within days? How many goals have you announced that never became real? Not because you didn't care, but because something inside you lost momentum quietly. Let me ask you something more precise. When you say you want to change, what do you actually mean? Do you want the outcome, or do you want the feeling of becoming someone who might achieve it? Because those are not the same. One demands sacrifice. The other only requires expression, and your behavior will always reveal which one you've chosen. Think about your daily patterns, not your intentions. Your patterns. When you feel resistance, what do you do? Do you stay with the discomfort, or do you reach for relief? Do you move toward the work, or toward something that makes you feel like you're still on track? Be honest, because your future is not built on what you plan. It's built on what you repeat. Here's another question. If no one could ever see your effort, no one could ever praise you, no one could ever acknowledge what you're building, would you still do it? Or would something inside you start to fade? That answer matters more than any strategy, because it reveals your true driver, external validation or internal standard. And if it's external, you will always be dependent on feedback, dependent on recognition, dependent on being seen. And that dependency will shape your entire life. You'll choose visible actions over meaningful ones, fast rewards over long-term results, expression over execution, and slowly, without realizing it, you will build a life that looks active but feels empty. Now consider the alternative. A life where most of your progress is invisible, where your standards are private, where your effort is consistent even when no one is watching, where your identity is built on proof, not projection. That life is quieter, but it is also stronger, because it is not fragile. It does not collapse when feedback disappears. It does not depend on motivation. It does not require applause to continue. It sustains itself. Let me ask you something difficult. Are you trying to build something real, or are you trying to maintain the image of someone who could build something real? There's a difference, and you can feel it. One creates pressure. The other creates comfort, and most people choose comfort. They stay in the space where they can talk about potential without confronting their actual output. But time doesn't negotiate with that. Time reveals it. 6 months, 1 year, 5 years. Eventually, the gap becomes visible, not just to others, to you. And that realization is heavy, because deep down you know exactly what you avoided. Not difficulty, not complexity. Silence. The silence where there is no one to impress, no one to explain to, no one to validate your direction. Just you and your standard. So ask yourself one final question, and don't answer it quickly. Are you willing to let go of being seen in order to become someone real? Because if the answer is no, nothing changes. But if the answer is yes, then everything you've heard up to this point stops being information and starts becoming a line you either cross or walk away from. Now understand this clearly. The environment you're living in is not neutral. It is engineered. Every platform you use, every feed you scroll, every notification you receive is designed to capture one thing: your attention. And once it has your attention, it begins to shape your behavior. Not aggressively. Subtly, it trains you to Share quickly. React instantly. Seek validation constantly, because that keeps you engaged. But what keeps you engaged does not move your life forward. Let that sink in. The same systems that reward your visibility are quietly weakening your ability to build anything real. They give you recognition without results, feedback without effort, identity without proof. And if you don't consciously resist that, you will drift, not dramatically, gradually. 1 year becomes 2, 2 becomes 5, and you wake up one day with a clear, uncomfortable realization. You've been active but not effective, busy but not building, and this is the cost. Not failure. Drift, because failure is visible. Drift is silent. And by the time you notice it, you've already lost time you can't recover. So this is not a small adjustment. This is a line. On one side, noise, validation, endless expression. On the other, silence, discomfort, real progress. And you don't get both. You choose every day with your actions, not your intentions. And if you don't choose deliberately, the system will choose for you, and it will not choose in your favor. So now we bring this to its final point. No more analysis, no more observation, no more passive understanding. This is where you decide who you are going to be, because everything you've heard up to this point comes down to one simple reality. You are either in control of your attention, or you are being controlled by what captures it. There is no middle ground, and control is not something you declare. It is something you demonstrate daily, quietly. So here's what this requires from you. You stop announcing immediately, not tomorrow, not next week. Now, you remove the habit at the root. No more explaining your plans. No more signaling your intentions. No more leaking energy for temporary validation. You become unavailable to that pattern, and in its place you build something far more difficult. Discipline without witnesses. You wake up and you do the work, without posting it, without talking about it, without needing anyone to know. You sit in the discomfort long enough for it to stop controlling you. You train your mind to associate effort with reward. You rebuild your focus, your standards, your internal structure, and you do it consistently. Not when it feels good, not when you're motivated, but especially when it doesn't, because that is where the shift happens. That is where you separate from a version of yourself that needed to be seen in order to feel real. You don't need that anymore. You replace it with something stronger, proof, private, undeniable proof, day after day, action after action, until something changes. Not externally at first, internally. You start to trust yourself again, not because you said you would do something, but because you actually did it. And that trust is power. Because once you trust yourself, you stop negotiating with your own standards. You stop breaking promises to yourself. You stop living in potential and start operating in reality. Let me be direct. No one is coming to enforce this for you. No system, no app, no external structure. This is self-imposed. And that's what makes it valuable. Because discipline is not restriction. It is sovereignty. It is the ability to direct your behavior independent of your impulses. And once you have that, everything else becomes possible. But without it, nothing holds. So don't overcomplicate this. You don't need a perfect plan. You don't need the ideal conditions. You need to stop leaking energy and start building in silence. Today, not visibly, not publicly, privately, where it actually counts. And if you can do that consistently, you won't need to tell anyone who you're becoming. They will see it. Too late to question it. Too late to compete with it. Because while they were talking, you were building. And that difference changes everything. If you are ready to stop explaining your potential and start executing it in the dark, subscribe and commit to the silence.